welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my October wrap-up. So I read 10 books in October, which I think ended up being better than I had expected because October was a really busy month for me. So I'm very happy. Let's just jump right on in. So first I listened to Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I have heard nothing but good things about the Brown Sister trilogy, and now that I've finally kind of gotten into the romance genre, I was like, I need to prioritize these, and I was not disappointed. I gave this book 5 stars. It was just the perfect romance, honestly. So we follow Chloe Brown. So I didn't know much going into this, and I really liked that. The only thing I knew was I had heard that this had really good disability rep, and I would agree with that, but it was just so cute. Like, Chloe Brown, I think, out of the 3 books in the companion series, she's probably my favorite character. I really loved her. I thought she was so complex. She was such a powerful girl boss, and I loved it. I do think she was a little, like, too good for her love interest, Red. Like, I think she could do better than him. I wasn't super impressed by him, but you know what? They're happy, and it was just really good. And the thing I like that I noticed about all of the books in this series is Talia Hibbert's writing is so witty. Like, the witty banter is a 10 out of 10. The humor is so good, and she just is really able to weave, like, complex kind of topics or aspects of life that aren't really seen that often in romance books. She manages to kind of weave them in there without it feeling like, you know, I want to talk about disability rep. It doesn't necessarily take a backseat to the romance, but it also doesn't feel forced. It's just a component of it, and I could just go on and on. It was so good. So yeah, 5 stars to Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Then I read The Haunting of Blackwood House, and I gave this 3 stars. This is a companion series, and all of the books in there, I don't really think they need to get read in any specific order. They don't really interrelate like the Brown Sister trilogy does, for example. They just all kind of, like, they're haunted house stories by the same author. But this was the first one I read, and I gave it a 3. Like I said, I really like it. It's like a turn your brain off, fun, quick, fluffy, as far as like a horror book can be fluffy, kind of read. It's a ghost story, it's a haunted house story. The writing's not like amazing, the plot isn't all that unique or anything by any means, but it was just a really fun ghost story, and that's exactly what I wanted from it. And there were some scenes in there that actually scared me. Like, there's one instance where I had to close the book, and I was just like staring, like processing what was happening because I got like full body chills. So would definitely recommend that if you're just looking for like a quick and easy scary read, because that's honestly one of the books that has scared me the most, I think. So yeah, I definitely had fun with that one. Then I listened to Take a Hint, Dani Brown. This was my least favorite out of the 3, but I still gave it a 4 star. Like, they're all really good. It's just for some reason, and I've heard other people say this too, like, Take a Hint, Dani Brown is just more forgettable than the other 2. It has like middle book syndrome where it's still really good, and everything that I loved, like that I love about all 3 of the stories was in this. I just wasn't as connected to the characters, I think, in the end. And like, I remember the least amount of details from it. So yeah, but obviously still a really good read, but I just really loved Chloe. I did also really like the anxiety rep in Dani Brown, but as someone with anxiety, but I do wish it had gotten more time. I don't know, I wish it was in there a little bit more and like a little bit more integral to the plot, but that was a component that I enjoyed as well. Then I read Clown in a Cornfield. I hadn't really heard great things about this book, but it was available through Libby as an ebook, and I was like, you know what, this will be a great like before bed read for October. I gave it a 3. It's more like a 2.5. It was really, really slow to get started, like so slow, and I think there was too many characters. There were too many high schoolers where none of them were really that well developed just because there were too many. But the book really does read like a classic like teen slasher. So it's fun in that sense, but I do wish the pacing was picked up a little bit more. And I also don't know, you know, how much of the underdeveloped characters was just like not good writing on the author's part or an intentional choice, because in like teen slasher films, we don't really know the characters that well. You know what I mean? Like they exist to be slashed, basically. So in that sense, I'm like, I get it. But that doesn't necessarily, I feel like, doesn't translate super well to book form, because you do want a little bit more substance, or at least I do, when it comes to book characters versus movie characters. So plot-wise, it was like a 2-star, but vibe-wise, gore-wise, you know, Halloween vibe slasher-wise, like I would bump it up to a 3. So next I listened to Actor Age Eve Brown, and I gave this a 5-star as well. If I had to pick my favorite of the trilogy, I think I would pick this one. So like if I wanted to get super technical, I'd drop Chloe Brown to like a 4.75. And I think the reason why I ended up liking Eve Brown better is because her love interest Jacob, I really, really liked him. I think he was my favorite love interest out of the 3 books. And Chloe's my favorite main character. But, you know, like Eve and Jacob were like right here. And for me, Chloe and Red wasn't good enough for Chloe. So anyway, this was definitely my favorite. It was just so good. I can't even, I'm like, I don't think there is gonna be a romance book that is gonna top these books. Like, these 3 books are top tier, so good, and Eve Brown was just amazing. So I think this is without a doubt my favorite romance book that I've read. Shout out to Eve Brown. Then I read Nothing But Blackened Teeth, and I gave this a 2-star. This is a horror novella inspired by Japanese folklore, and it sounded really cool. The cover is super creepy, and it just fell a little flat for me. I really did like the folklore elements. There were some that I wasn't familiar with, but some that I was familiar with, like Kappa and things like that I'm familiar with, and I really liked how they were integrated, but at the end of the day, it had a weird vibe going on. So it was basically almost like we're gonna investigate a haunted house storyline. But the writing style was really weird, where there'd be a bunch of adjectives to describe something, but all the adjectives would basically be synonyms for each other. So it's like, why have them then if they're not adding something to this description? You know, it's like saying the tea was cold, not hot, tepid and lukewarm. And I'm like, we get it. Like, if you're gonna repeat yourself, we don't need all of these synonyms. And so that really bothered me. And then there was a lot of commentary on like horror tropes from the characters within the story. Like along the lines of, for example, like, oh, you know, we shouldn't split up because that's what, when people split up in horror movies, they die, and that kind of thing. And that felt like a completely different tone than the rest of the novella. And it really like took me out of the story. It commenting on horror stories within the story. It was odd. The setting was really good, but the characters were all pretty unlikable for me, and because it's a novella, obviously, like, we don't get to know them that well, but I don't know, the stakes just also felt really low. It was kind of disappointing all around. So yeah, but I think the commentary and the wording of things is what kind of annoyed me the most. Next, I listened to The Wall of Winnipeg and Me by Mariana Zapata, the queen of slow burn romance. This was, without a doubt, the slowest burn. I think nothing happened between the two love interests until like 93 or 94% of the way through the audiobook. The audiobook was 16 hours, so it's a thick boy, but I honestly really enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. I didn't think that I would like it that much just because I'm like, sports romance, like this guy's a football player. I don't care about football in the slightest, but I ended up really liking Vanessa, our main character, and I really did like Aiden in the end. And so I was like really invested in their slow burn romance and their relationship, and there was just a lot of really good like character development for both of them, which I think comes from the book being so long. But it was just like a really fun, kind of fluffy, slow burn time. One thing that was kind of weird was there was a little bit of a plot thread of abuse with one of the characters' backstories that didn't really seem to tie into, like, it didn't seem to be relevant to anything else. And so I kind of thought, like, if you're gonna drop that in the story, like, at least follow it through and, like, have something to say about it and have it be relevant in some way, but it kind of wasn't. And then the thing that annoyed me the most was our main character, Vanessa, refers to Aiden as big guy, like, every 3 pages. Like, if she's talking about him to someone else, she'll refer to him as that. She'll think about it like, oh, the big guy's over there. She will call him that to his face, like, oh, are you hungry, big guy? And for some reason, he doesn't mind it, but it was so weird, so annoying, and so repetitive. And it's like, we get it. Every description we get of Aiden, he's tall, he's buff as hell, beefy, huge football player. Like, we get it. He is indeed a big guy, but we don't need her to call him big guy every 2 seconds. It was so weird. And I'm like, realistically, wouldn't Aiden get really tired of her referring to him as big guy, like in public in front of a bunch of people? And I don't know, I just couldn't. I could not with that nickname. But other than that, I really did like it in the end, and I thought it was really cute, and it was just such a fluffy, slow burn time. And I think reading this and then reading the Brown Sisters series really did show me that in terms of like character interaction and writing style, I love like the witty banter that the Brown Sisters series had, but in terms of like pacing of the romance itself, I really do like a slow burn. And I think that's why I loved The Wall of Winnipeg and Me so much, was the slow burn aspect of it. So yeah, I'm excited because I'm dipping my toes into all these different romance books for the first time and kind of like sorting out, you know, here's things I do like, here's things I don't, and it's just been really fun and rewarding. So if you have any recommendations based on, you know, me enjoying The Wall of Winnipeg and Me and the Brown Sisters series, let me know. Then I listened to The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. I listened to this, I think, 1 or 2 days before Halloween. It's really short. It's like an hour and a half while I was cleaning and getting ready because we threw a Halloween party. And I ended up giving this 2 stars. I, for the life of me, cannot remember if I have read this before. I feel like I did read it in school, but I don't know. And I am familiar with the story, but it was weird. I gave it a 2. All of the exciting, like, Headless Horseman, spooky stuff that you think of when you think of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow all happened within the last, like, 20 minutes. And so the first hour of it was just really slow, really boring. There was some racial slurs in there that obviously, like, the text has not aged well. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm like, it did have good autumn vibes. It was only an hour and a half. So I gave it a 2. Wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but, you know, it was something quick to listen to while I was doing other things. And then I read The Haunting of Gillespie House, which is another one in that series with The Haunting of Blackwood House. And this one I gave a 2. I was expecting to enjoy it as much as Blackwood House, but I had issues with our main character. She made some really, really dumb decisions, and for that reason, she was really annoying. And towards the end, like when things started ramping up, everything just felt really convenient. And there was one part I remember where our main character even commented on the fact of like things being convenient, because she falls off of like this huge concrete platform thing, like 8 feet or something, to the ground, and somehow hasn't injured herself in the slightest. And she thinks to herself, she says something like, wow, it's like, I'm so glad it's so convenient that this didn't injure me. And I'm like, okay, like, I guess at least you're aware, like, the writer's self-aware that it's very convenient plot, but it just seemed weird to me. 2-star. It was a really quick read. I think this book was like half the length of Blackwood House, so it wasn't like I was suffering while I was reading it or anything, but it definitely wasn't as good as Blackwood House, but still the same sense of like just a fun, quick, scary story kind of vibe, so I am going to pick up more by the author for sure. And then last but not least, I think I listened to this on Halloween, was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So I obviously, like, I've heard of the character of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I never really knew the plot of the story, and the story itself is like a 3.5-hour audiobook, which was great, and so I was like, you know what, we're gonna do it. Didn't really have high hopes after giving The Legend of Sleepy Hollow a 2, but I gave this a 4. I really, really enjoyed it, and it has a really good spooky atmosphere. The vibes are immaculate. Just the story of it is really cool. Obviously, I'm sure you guys know, like, the whole thing with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is, like, this doctor finds a way to kind of, like, turn into someone else, and, like, it's more of, like, his... It reminds me of, like, the whole Freud, like, id versus super ego thing of, like, his, like, darker side. And so it's basically, like, 2 different people, but it's the same person, and they're kind of, like, investigating him through the whole thing because he did some bad things, and they're trying to look for Mr. Hyde, but Mr. Hyde is proving really hard to find, because obviously when it's Dr. Jekyll, it's like Mr. Hyde doesn't exist. Very, very cool, and, like, the arc up to the big, like, conflict, I guess, and the big climax of the story was really, really cool. The only thing that I didn't really end up liking, because it was going to be a 5-star, but the last, I don't know, 40 minutes of the audiobook was Dr. Jekyll, like, reading his, like, journal entries explaining the process of how he unlocked Mr. Hyde and how, you know, he had committed this crime and he was trying to get away with it, and he ended up getting stuck in that form and all of this, and it kind of, like, just over-explained the mystery, you know, and it kind of gave, because part of the cool thing was, like, we don't know that much about him, and so it's like he's this mysterious, creepy person, but then at the end to have it all explained and to kind of, like, revisit the entire story but from his perspective, and he's just, like, telling you about it, really made the pace weird, and, like, it felt like a very different story at the end, because it's like, I don't necessarily want you to explain every single thing to me, because it makes it less spooky, you know, but it was still really good. 4 stars. Would definitely recommend if you're looking for, like, a quick and easy and engaging classic. This is definitely a good one, and the audiobook was really good. I listened to it on Audible, and it was narrated by, what is his name? The guy who played Thorin in the Hobbit movies. Who is that? Who played Thorin? Richard Armitage. It was narrated by him, and he did a really, really good job. And so it was a really, really fun audiobook to listen to. So those were the books that I read in October. Overall, I had a really good reading month in October. Read a lot of fun, spooky books, and had fun reading more romances. If you have read any of these, I would love to know your thoughts below, and recommend me some romance books if you're into romance, because kind of don't know where to go from here. If you made it to the end, leave an autumn leaf emoji in the comments. I hope you are having a great day or night, and I will see you next time. Bye!